After watching episode 3 of The Acolyte, which was the worst Star Wars production I have ever watched, it has triggered a reaction in me as Star Wars Disney canon continues to plunge to new depths of poor writing, poor dialogue, poor acting, and just poor storytelling. As a Star Wars content creator, it's becoming a continued worry to me that since George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, it continues to dismantle George Lucas's original vision. Star Wars is dying, but why is it dying? Well, it seems to be a question that tends to haunt me most of the time these days, and I feel many of you out there must feel the same as I do. That if Disney continue on this path, the story will become so far from George's original story vision that we won't recognise Star Wars anymore. And I suppose with the Acolyte series, that has already happened. Recently, another Star Wars YouTube creator's video covered a list ranking all the Star Wars productions ever made, and the top 3 were indeed the original movies, making Empire Strikes Back the best Star Wars production of all time. But here is my thoughts and feelings on why the story is getting worse, until somebody literally does something about it. There is a huge inconsistency in the writers, with different visions of what Star Wars should be, which adds to a lack of central direction from a single person to sign off. This appears to be one of the major reasons why Star Wars is in decline and losing the respect of the fans. They choose someone to direct the next Star Wars project, and then they do what they want without really understanding Star Wars lore very well, or even looking into it very deeply. George Lucas has openly remarked several times how he has lost control of Star Wars, and Disney have created something different from how he envisaged the story to go. If I was George, I would feel like Star Wars was being ruined, apart from the original 6 movies he made. For that reason, it feels like Star Wars, if legend stories had been brought to the big screen, and also into TV series, then Disney would have had far less backlash from the old fans than the state they have driven it to now. When Disney bought Star Wars from George Lucas back in 2012, I felt it was going to be a great opportunity to tell the stories I had read beyond George's original movies, but instead they chose to scrap the old material, calling it Legends, and then rewrite their own canon version. When being interviewed by Dave Filoni, Leslie Headland said this, and I quote, "It has to feel like Star Wars, basically what George created. It's the North Star." My response to that is it does feel like they are attempting to seem like they care about Star Wars, but I genuinely think they are superficially skimming the surface of Star Wars, and George would probably tell them that. So what are the issues with this for me? Well, without talking about the woke and the political agenda Disney bosses seem to drive ahead with, Disney don't have a George Lucas figure to govern what Star Wars is about and keep it authentic. Part of me thinks this is a deliberate move and would limit their own agenda. But even someone like Dave Filoni is not George Lucas and will never fill his shoes for me. There are too many different writers and directors, and although there has been some great writing and casting, particularly with Rogue One and Andor, and The Mandalorian Series 1 and 2, which were great, all the other series have been poor, and in particular The Acolyte is so lazy and frankly boring. Why do we have to wait for the last few episodes of the series for them to reveal the antagonists? However, the last trilogy of films had no continuity and were clearly handled like 3 separate projects rather than writing one big story and separating into 3 stories. I felt like they played it safe with the first movie, gave it to someone else who completely lost the plot, the middle movie, and then they had to bring back the original writers and director to attempt to fix the damage caused from the second movie, but also made a total mess of it too. The acting was lazy, the story was inconsistent and silly at times. They lacked the authentic feel of the original movies, and if I was the head of Disney, I would go as far to say I would scrap those movies and archive them, then start again to follow the legend story arc, which was actually very different. Bad castings and bad acting has been a continual issue from my perspective for some time. There have also been terrible plots and inconsistent storytelling as a symptom of not having George Lucas as its figurehead. In my opinion, Tony Gilroy seems to get Star Wars, as he has created Andor, which has been the best Star Wars made to date since George Lucas' original films, although Rogue One was also pretty good. Having so many different people lead on different parts of the story and timeline will obviously create problems for the overall story itself. This also creates so many mistakes by directors, just aren't tuned into what fans would expect to see, and just do their own thing. For example, Tales of the Empire was a series which could have been so good, but instead was predictable and lacked proper understanding of the Empire and simply bored me. It could have been about a couple of tales providing insight into the inner workings of the Imperial government, like the ISB etc., and covered familiar characters that just haven't been part of the content yet. Instead, it told a boring story of Morgan Elsbeth and another story about an Inquisitor. Trying to appeal to too many audiences downgrades its appeal. The original Star Wars films were pitched at the same level in live action, and we were used to that. The prequels obviously had their challenges from the fans, but there were some brilliant storytelling elements to them, for example the rise of Palpatine and the Empire, plus how the Republic was falling apart. Also, the canon versus legend story debate is a constant battle, and it is a subject which I have my own internal struggle on. I could continue, but to conclude, I love Star Wars and would not be making Star Wars content if I didn't. But please, Disney, get someone to read the old stories and follow the original stories, characters, and lore. I grew up with the original George Lucas movies and the Expanded Universe publications. So if Star Wars has a future, something has to change to salvage what dignity the story has left, which is very little. But I do always feel like I should embrace the direction Disney is going in, but struggle with that because I think they could have done things so much better. Although I await the second season of Andor, Star Wars Legends and old Star Wars remains my preference. What's your opinion on Star Wars? And what would you do if you were leading Disney Star Wars at the moment? It would be great to get your views. Thank you for watching, and as always, long live Star Wars and long live the Empire.